Hey, this is Em. Happy Father's Day to all the men who take care of others in one way or another. This video is part of a project to commemorate modern legendary companions by celebrating their lives through art and storytelling. The story I have for you today is one that a lot of dads can relate to. Say hello to Poody Tat, or Poody for short. Her portrait will have a background, but something simpler than what's in the photo. I removed the original background and drew in some simple blobs of color just to establish the two planes, the bed she's laying on and the distant background. In Canva, I can change the color of the overlay to get an idea for what I'd like to use. These are the three main options I sent to Poody's dad, but you can see that it's easy to cycle through pretty much any color and identify one that suits your subject or ties it into the pet parent's decor and color scheme. Poody's dad opted for the blue background. Now it's business as usual, and we'll overlay a grid on our reference photo that corresponds to what we already drew on our 8x10 canvas so that we can scale up and transfer the image. When I said Poody's story is one dads could relate to, that's because it starts with some human kid saying, "Can't we keep her?" and ends with a would-be empty nester and his furry companion. With the sketch complete, I'll erase the grid and vacuum up the crumbs. I'll start by painting a layer of white and wet blend the blues on top. I'll later do the same to get in flats for the grays of Poody's coat, and then work in layers to continue adding depth and detail. The first strokes in Poody's story are the tiny screams heard coming from a barn where a little furball, just a few weeks old, was found in a hole in the foundation. The woman who owned the property pulled the kitten out of the hole but left it in the barn overnight for its mother to return. The next morning, however, the kitten was back in the hole, screaming its hungry little heart out. Afraid it was abandoned, the woman brought the kitten inside, bathed it, and collected all the necessary supplies from the pet store, including formula and tiny bottles. During this critical early stage, the woman visited her daughter in college. Noticing how the kitten stared at the piano while she played, the daughter named her Chopin. Once the kitten was weaned, the woman needed to find a permanent placement for it. So she called her younger son, who still lived at home with his father and always wanted a cat. Chopin was cute, but troublesome, and there were early signs that Mama had indeed abandoned this kitten due to some health issues. After experiencing several intense heat cycles, Grandma stepped in and took the cat to the vet to get spayed, where she registered it under her call name, Cat. Pet names often devolve, and as Chopin became Cat, Cat became Poody Tat, or Poody for short. Her behavior issues were not resolved by the alteration, and she continued her neurotic tendencies. A few years later, the son left to join the military. Poody's dad, instead of being left with an empty nest, was, for better or worse, the sole owner of a crazy cat rescued by his ex and given to his children. You may be wondering what exactly was wrong with Poody. Her muscles would involuntarily twitch, causing her extreme anxiety, which led to frantic behavior that included loudly yelling at her own haunches. She was diagnosed with Feline Hyperesthesia Syndrome. Medication did not alleviate her problems, and often the best they could do was cover her rear with a towel to deaden the sensations and make it a bit more bearable for her. The son told me that when he visited home on military leave, he would have to keep his bedroom door closed at night, or Poody would leave her towel to visit him and wake the household with an episode. That's why we wanted to include her ever-important emotional support towel in the portrait. I wanted to achieve a really gritty texture for Poody's special towel, so I tested a few options using some things around the house. And in the end, I went with the steel wool. Companion animal bonds, like all great relationships, don't have to stem from grand gestures or impressive skills. We're often drawn closer by weathering hard times together. Poody and her dad are a great example of how patience and constancy can create mutual comfort. The daughter told me that her dad enjoys solving Poody's little problems, and Poody's dad has this to say about her. The only human food she likes to eat is broccoli sprouts. She loves any kind of plastic bag and sleeps on them, but is terrified of boxes of any size. She's very playful, loyal, and affectionate, even though she gets uncomfortable from the hyperesthesia. She stayed very close to me when I was very ill, and has been a great buddy. He's happy he ended up with her as a companion, and will be sad when they are parted someday. Now that we've wrapped up the main phase of painting, here's a closer shot at some of the finer details. We're going to frame this portrait ourselves, so let's pop it in this vintage frame to make sure Poody's name is still visible after mounting. Then we'll sign her name in gold chrome. I haven't shown this step before, but I coat the painting with Mod Podge to seal it. I would not recommend using a cheap foam roller to get in that texture, as it might leave flecks of material behind that have to be painstakingly painted over by matching colors that were blended on the canvas. I'll cut the backing from this roll of butcher paper, then set it aside. You may have noticed earlier that only 3 of the original prongs are left on this vintage frame, so we'll need to add a few more fasteners to keep the canvas board secure. I'll drill pilot holes and then hammer in some finishing nails, making sure to bend them down so they don't get in the way of the backing later. There, nice and secure. Next, I'll line the backing with double-sided tape, keeping it flush with the edges for a clean seal. By using this method to attach the backing, it'll be easier for someone to swap the frame out later if they want to. Then I'll stick it in place on the back of the frame. This old wall art has 2 mounting brackets in the corners when it really only needs 1 in the center, so we'll remove and repurpose one for Poody's portrait. Placed a bracket's width away from the edge of the center of the frame, we'll drill a pilot hole and attach the first screw. Then we can use a level before drilling the second hole to make sure the picture won't hang crookedly. The first screw keeps the bracket from moving, so it stays nice and straight. Now 14 years old, Poody and her cat dad have been through a lot together. They have a special bond, and he continues to cater to her quirks and special needs. Poody's dad had the same spirit of self-sacrifice and service in raising his kids as a single parent that he continues to show for his aging, crazy kitty. That's why his son commissioned this portrait of his dad's favorite little buddy. Happy Father's Day to Poody's dad, and all fathers of both human and fur children. If you have a legendary companion of your own, feel free to share their story in the comments. Until next time, Memento Canis.